Okay, so basically today we will look at some versions of the pigeonhole principle and look at some applications with these theorems. Okay, so the first version of the pigeonhole principle is like this. So if you have a relation, I hope everyone is familiar with what a relation is. What is a relation from a set A to a set B? What is it? What is the relation from a set A to a set B? So theoretically, what is a relation from a set A to a set B? It's nothing, it is just a subset of the Cartesian product. Okay? A relation is just a subset of the Cartesian product. So a relation from a set A to a set B is a subset of the Cartesian product A cross B. That's all that it is. Okay? What is a function? A function is a relation with some specific property. What is it? Yeah. So you cannot have, if a comma b1 is equal to a comma b2, then it is compulsory that b1 should be equal to b2, right? And every element from the domain should be mapped to something. So given any a in A, there should be some b in B, such that a comma b is in the set. So functions are also relations and subsets of the Cartesian product, even though we write things like mappings. This mapping thing is an older method of looking at a function. When we started looking at functions at that manner, but now we define it set theoretically. Okay, anyway. So the versions of the pigeonhole principle, this is the first one, is suppose you have a relation from A to B. So if A and B are sets, are finite sets. In fact, in this course, unless I specify, everything is finite. Okay, finite. If A and B are finite sets, and R is a relation from A to B, then we have the following. So 1, okay. So R is basically a subset of A cross B, okay, a relation from A to B. So there exists some A in A, there exists some A in A, such that, okay, cardinality of R of A. Now what is this R of A? So R of A is the collection of all elements in B, okay, such that A comma B is in R. Okay, let me put it up here. R of A is nothing but the collection of all B in B such that A comma B belongs to R. That's what R of A is. And we'll be using another notation also, that is R inverse of B. So R inverse of B for any element B of the set B, okay, we will be using this. This is nothing but the collection of all of its pre-images. Okay, this is the collection of all the images of A. Okay, this will be the collection of all the pre-images of A. Okay, you can very easily talk about the, in fact, for any relation you can talk about the inverse relation. That's natural. Okay, you can say that you can define the inverse of a relation. If R is a relation from A to B, you can talk about the relation R inverse from B to A. In what manner? By saying that A comma B or B comma A is in R inverse. Sometimes, of course, we write this as, the other notation we use for this is B R inverse A. Okay, whatever, those are different notations. If and only if A comma B is in R. That's the inverse, just the this thing. So that's the way we can talk about it. So this is actually just the image under R inverse of B. This set is just the set of images of B under the relation R inverse, or the set of all A in A such that A comma B is in R. I hope this doesn't confuse you. Yeah, with the pre-images of B. Exactly, it's going to be exactly the same thing. So you will be able to, you will always find an A in A such that the cardinality of R of A is greater than or equal to the cardinality of R upon the cardinality of A. Okay. 2, you will always find A in A such that the cardinality of R of A is less than or equal to the cardinality of R by the cardinality of A. Okay. 3, actually 3 and 4 follow from 1 and 2 itself. Okay, that is, you will always find a B in B such that the cardinality of R inverse of B is greater than or equal to the cardinality of R upon the cardinality of B. In fact, this actually follows from 1, because just use 1 on the relation R inverse, you get this. Okay, and 4, you will always find B in B such that the cardinality of R inverse of B is less than or equal to cardinality of R. So very simple to prove all of these. There is nothing difficult in it. Okay, very simple proofs, just proof by contradiction. Okay, what is the negation of this statement? Suppose this this does not take place. What does it mean? For every A in A, cardinality of R of A is strictly less than the cardinality of R upon the cardinality of A. That's what it means. Okay, so let me prove the first one. In fact, you can get the second one in exactly the same manner. So suppose, so I am assuming the negation, proving the negation is not true, then if the negation is not true, the statement has to be true. That's the proof by contradiction. So suppose for every A in A, cardinality of R of A is strictly less than the cardinality of R upon the cardinality of A. Okay, now what we can do is, you can take R and you can partition it in this manner, that is, so the cardinality of R, see, you can always take R and partition it in this particular manner by looking at, for every A in A, you take A comma B in the set if for every A in A, you look at all the A comma B's. Okay, I don't know whether I'm clear. See, R of R is some subset of the Cartesian product. Okay, go over every element of A. For every element of A, look at all the A comma X. Okay, such that A comma X is in R. For a distinct A's, so you look at all A1 comma X1, A1 comma X2, A1 comma X3, and so on. Then you look at A2 comma Y1, A2 comma Y2. It's difficult for me to tell you what I mean by. Okay, so you can always take your A and write it. So notice that I should write it like this. This is going to be a disjoint union. You look at your R, right? I can always write it as a disjoint union in this manner. That is union A in A, right? Union A in A what is this? So A comma B such that A comma B is in R. Is this clear what this is doing? You take all those tuples such that A comma B is in R for a fixed A. Right? This is going to be a disjoint union. Can everyone see that? For each A in A, there is no way, if the first coordinates are different, then the two elements are different. So therefore, this is going to be a disjoint union of R. Is that okay? So, how many elements are in this set? In one of these sets, how many elements are there? As many images of A that are there, right? In each of these, this is not the set of images, it is A comma the images of A. But the number of elements here is going to be exactly the number of images of A. Is that clear? Okay, so therefore, this is a disjoint union. Okay, so therefore, the cardinality of R would be equal to summation, because this is going to be, the number of elements in this is going to be number of elements in R of A. What is R of A? Just the second coordinates of these. But all second coordinates in this have to be distinct, right? You can find a bijection from this set to R of A. Can everyone see that bijection? What you will take A comma B to? B. Right? You take A comma B to B. That's a bijection. You can prove that that's a bijection. Take A comma B to B. That's a bijection. Okay, what is the inverse of that map? You will take B to A comma B. That's the inverse. Okay, you can even prove 1 on 2 if you like, but in any case, the number of elements here is the number of elements in R of A. So this is A in A, cardinality of R of A. Now, this is the assumption that we have made. So each of them is less than cardinality of R by cardinality of A. So this is going to be strictly less than cardinality of R upon cardinality of A. But how many such, this is a constant, right? So how many such times, how many times am I adding this to itself? Cardinality of A times, right? So this is equal to cardinality of A times cardinality of R upon cardinality of A. Can you see what we have proved? What do we get if we make this assumption? R is strictly less than, cardinality of R is strictly less than cardinality of R. It can never happen, right? No number can be strictly less than itself, okay? Therefore, the cardinality of R is strictly less than the cardinality of R, and therefore, this is a contradiction. So, if the contradiction if this is a contradiction, it means that this statement does not hold, which means that this statement holds true. And you can very easily see that if I had to simply replace the greater than with a strictly with a less than or equal to, right? What would this become? Strictly greater than, right? This would become strictly, and in the proof, the only thing that would change is this. It would be strictly greater than. That would give you cardinality of R is strictly greater than cardinality of R. That's also a contradiction. So therefore, that would with that slight change in the proof, it would give you the second theorem. Okay, the second statement would hold in that manner. Try and see. You can try to do it on your own. That's not difficult. You just need to interchange the signs. Okay, check that it works. There is nothing wrong that happens. Okay. In fact, the third and fourth follow just from the first two, because R inverse is a function, but we can write the proof separately if you are not comfortable. So let's, just for the sake of it, let's do 4 and you can do 3. So I'll just show you that these are all very simple to follow. So suppose for every B in B, okay, this is not true. So what does that mean? Cardinality of R inverse of B is strictly greater than cardinality of R upon cardinality of B. Now, I can write, I'm going to follow the same principle. By the way, can anyone tell me what is the relation between the cardinality of R and the cardinality of R inverse? Yeah? They have to be equal. One, you're writing the first coordinate. What is R inverse? You're just switching the coordinates around. The second coordinate becomes first coordinate, the first coordinate becomes second coordinate. Equal cardinality. There is no this thing. Okay. So that's why it follows. Because here actually you should have R inverse of B. R inverse this thing, but we'll do it without that also. You can see that it works. Okay. So here we can see that the cardinality of R, or we can see that R can be written as, I'm going to write it as a disjoint union of, look at the pre-images. You look at B in B, you look at all the A comma B's such that A is in, such that A comma B is in R. Is that okay? That's what now the number of elements here is going to be exactly the number of pre-images of B. Okay, this is a disjoint union, it's quite clear. So therefore the cardinality of R is going to be equal to summation B in B, cardinality of R inverse of B. Okay, but we made an assumption that this is strictly greater than this. So this would be strictly greater than summation B in B, cardinality of R, which is equal to cardinality of B times. Okay, there's absolutely nothing in this. It tells you that cardinality of R is strictly greater than cardinality, which means that we have made some mistake, and the mistake is in this assumption. Okay, so that's the proof. So this is one of the most generalized forms of the pigeonhole principle that we will be looking at. It is quite, not that useful in solving problems, but in such a general form, but nevertheless, it is a fact. So let's look at something which is still not the basic version of the pigeonhole principle, something a little more general, which I have in fact told you at the start of the class. That is, if you have 4 pigeonholes and 9 pigeons, what do you expect you expect that at least one of the pigeonholes will have 3 pigeons in it. Okay, so how do I put that in the pigeonhole principle? So that's going to be in this manner. So you can see that there is a association. The association is pigeons to pigeonholes, right? The association is from the pigeons to the pigeonholes, right? There's an association. One pigeon sits in one pigeonhole. Of course, each pigeonhole could have multiple number of pigeons in it, but a single pigeon cannot sit in 2 pigeonholes. So that's the sense of a single pigeon cannot sit in 2 pigeonholes, right? So that's the sense of a function, right? So it tells us that we can think of this as a function, and that's what we are looking at. So this is a little more generalized form of a not as specific as the basic version. So if A and B are sets, and are finite sets, again finite. Okay, these are finite sets, and f from A to B is a function. Okay, then, so why did we, what was it that tells us that there should be at least 3 pigeons sitting in the, division algorithm? So, it is, you look at the number of pigeons divided by the number of pigeonholes, right? That's what gave you that 3, right? It was greater than 3. The number of, it was greater than 2, right? It was strictly greater than 2. Did you see that? Number of pigeons were 9. Number of pigeonholes were 4, right? Since this was slightly more than 3, you expect at least 3 to be, slightly more than 2, you expect at least 1 to have more than 3. Okay, that is the general principle, what you are trying to search for. That's exactly what we are going to write here. That is 1. There exists some B in B, right? There is a pigeonhole, right? The set B is, you can think of as the pigeonholes, right? So there's a B in B which has more than cardinality of A upon cardinality of B number of pigeons. That's the way. So therefore, such that the number of elements in F inverse of B is greater than or equal to cardinality of A upon the cardinality of B. Is there also a lower bound? Yes. So, in fact, a lower bound will not make sense when the cardinality of A is bigger than the cardinality of B, because the cardinality of A, I'm making a mistake. This would be a lower bound. Is there an upper bound is the question. So, let's see. So there exists a B in B. You can actually prove this the same way, such that, but this statement, we'll see in which cases it makes sense. Means which cases they are actually relevant. Okay. You will also be able to find a B in B such that cardinality of A. You can see in certain cases they are quite, this one is not very relevant when the cardinality of A is bigger than the cardinality of B. Can you see that? It basically tells you nothing. Can anyone see that? All it tells you, because if the cardinality of A is bigger than the cardinality of B, then what can you say here? becomes irrelevant. Let me just think about it. Why is this irrelevant? So less than or equal to 2 is what we have, right? There should be something, some whole, yeah, less than, oh, it's not very irrelevant possibly. So this essentially tells you that the number of pigeons, there should be one whole such that the number of pigeons is less than or equal to 2, at least in the case where we have looked at 9 by 4, right? So all of them cannot be bigger than 3. Right? This one will give us that much. Okay. Anyway, this, yeah. So how do we prove this? This is, anyone has any ideas? Right. We all know that the function is a relation, so I could just use the previous theorem. Okay. So I'm going to use the last 2 statements of the previous theorem. What does the last 2 statements tell me? The last 2 statements of the previous theorem tells us that, so let me prove the first one. Previous theorem, what happens is, there exists some B in B such that the cardinality of F inverse of B is greater than or equal to the cardinality of F, okay, divided by the cardinality of B. But what is the cardinality of F? What will be the cardinality of F? F is a function, so what will be the cardinality of F? Same as A. The cardinality of F will be exactly the same as A because every element of A is mapped to a single element in B. Okay, so you can prove very easily that the cardinality of, find a bijection between F. F, when you are looking at it, set theoretically is what you are looking at it, A comma B, such that A comma B is this thing, right? It's a subset of the Cartesian product with some properties. Okay, so this is going to be nothing but cardinality of A upon cardinality of B. This is good. Of course, the second one follows in the same manner. So let's look at an application of this theorem. We saw one application with those pigeons and holes, but that is not really that relevant. Let's look at a card game. This is another nice type of accounting which we do often. So you have a card game in which there are 3 suits. Okay, you have a card game in which there are 3 suits. Okay, one is so three suits. Okay, so one is the cannon, the other one is the horse, and the third one is the soldier. Okay, 3 suits of cards. Cannon, which we will denote by C. Okay, horse, and the soldier. Sorry. Okay, so if I deal, okay, so there is, have you all played Rummy? Anyone has played Rummy? This, you played Rummy? What is the intention in Rummy? What is it? Yeah, there are some kind of, you have to take your entire set of cards that you have. I think you get some 13 cards or something, I can't recollect exactly. And you have to make these triplets, either of the runs, I think they call them, I can't recollect exactly, but in increasing order, cards in increasing order from the same suit, or the same ones, right? Same numbers. So that's what I recollect when I look at this. So there are two types of this thing. So we define a set triplet. Okay, I'm making this up. So we define a set triplet, okay, to be, so this is some kind of this thing which we are looking for. Okay, set triplet to be a collection of 3 cards such that, so I will say that this collection of 3 cards is a set triplet if one of these two things happens: either all 3 are from the same suit, okay, or there is one from every suit. Okay, so collection of 3 cards will be called as set triplet. A collection of 3 cards will be called as a set triplet if either all 3 are of the same suit, that is either all horse, 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 or cannon, 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 or soldier, 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 or you have one horse, one cannon, one soldier. Okay, if such that either all cards are from the same suit, or you have exactly, or you need not even say exactly, or you have one card from each suit. So I am basically, and this is the type of question which we will be trying to answer throughout this section. So it's a nice introductory to that. So my question is like this: how many cards should I give you so that you have a set triplet among them? Obviously, if I give you one card, you cannot have a set triplet in it. If I give you 2 cards also, you can't have. If I give you 3 cards, can you be sure that there will be a set triplet in it? No, because you can give me 2 horses and 1 cannon. That's not going to be a set. What if I give you 4? Definitely not. It means you can't be sure that it's a set triplet, because I can give you 2 horses and 2 cannons. Among them, you cannot. What if I give you 5? Surely. Why? Yeah? Either
if you are not having 1, 1, 1, then we have only 2 kinds of. So either one will be of 3 or 4.
exactly. So what he says is that either you will have one from each suit, in which case you have a set triplet. If not, that means your cards have only 2 suits in it. So without loss of generality, we could just say it's the cannon and the horse. So these 5 cards have only 2 suits in it, right? Which means at least 3 of them should be from one of this thing, by the previous thing. Is that argument okay? So either all 3 suits are present in your 5 cards, which means you have a set triplet, right? If not, there are only 2 suits present in your cards, right? If there are 2 suits present in the cards, let's say it's the horse and the cannon, then at least one of them should be in 3 cards. right? That's the previous theorem tells us exactly that. Okay, so let's write it. That's the way. So in fact, this 5 is the optimal number. Okay, that's what I was trying to tell you with the previous one. What we are going to try to look for as we proceed. This is the kind of questions we'll solve. Show that any collection of 5 cards contains a set triplet. So with exactly the same argument, let's make this thing. It just be a little more rigorous with defining the functions, which we will not do throughout the course, but initially at least do it to see that it's the theorems that we are using. Okay, so you have of course 2 cases. If the 5 cards contain at least 1 card, or you need not even say at least, contain 1 card from every suit, then it contains a set triplet. Okay, hence let's assume that this is not true. Okay, hence we assume that the 5 cards consist of, let's say at most 2 suits. Okay, I don't want to say 2 suits because that will throw away one case, that is all cards being of the same suit, which is an obvious case, but why not just put it into this. Okay, at most 2 suits without loss of generality, say C and H, cannon and horse. It doesn't make a difference what my this thing is, right? So how do we make this argument in terms of the function that we have in the previous theorem? So we define, or let X be the set of 5 cards. Okay. So let X be the set of 5 cards. Define F from my domain is X to C comma H by, what will I take a card to? What will you map a card to? Its suit, right? You're just going to map it to its suit. If it's has the suit cannon, you will map it to cannon. If it has a suit horse, you map it to horse. We have assumed that all of them have either cannon or horse. Nobody has soldier. That's an okay assumption. The suit of X. The suit of X. Okay, X is a card. Okay, so that's what we have. So therefore, what we have here is that by the previous theorem, there will be some either C or H whose pre-image, whose cardinality of the pre-image, okay, the cardinality of the pre-image is bigger than 5 by 5, number of elements in X by 2. Okay, so by the previous theorem, there exists some, let's call it as S. So S will either be C or H. Okay, I am just trying to lessen my work. So there exists some S in this, such that the cardinality of F inverse of S is greater than or equal to number of elements in X upon the number of elements in, what is it? This, right? The number of elements in C comma H. What is this exactly? 2.5, right? 5 divided by 2, 2.5, right? Yeah? S is? Oh, I can't use S, right? So we'll have to use T. Have I fallen in a little bit of trouble? Yeah. So this is we know that this has to be an integer. This has to be an integer, okay, which is greater than or equal to 2.5, which means at least it should be 3. Correct? Because it's an integer. It's an integer, right? An integer bigger than 2.5. An integer bigger than 2.5 has to be at least 3. Is that right? An integer bigger than 2.5 has to be at least 3, right? Correct? Okay. So this I will write here. So therefore, as cardinality of F inverse of T is an integer, right? The cardinality of F inverse of T is greater than or equal to 3. Okay, that proves our statement, because what does it mean? So here your T is either C or H, right? If T is C, it means that 3 cards have the suit C. If this is H, if T is H, then 3 cards have suit H. Okay? No? Okay? So that's exactly what it means. You should have an intuition, you should be able to convert it into rigorous way of writing also. So that's what we mean by this. Let's look at another version of the pigeonhole principle, which is also very interesting. This is called as, this is a non-uniform version of the pigeonhole principle. In fact, this is again a generalized form of the previous statement. That means the previous statement can be proved from this. Okay, let's have a look at it. So So let A and B be finite sets. We should specify non-empty also. At least A should be non-empty because it's going to be the domain of a function. Let B equals, let A be a finite set and B be equal, be an n set. So these are the distinct elements of B. B1, B2, Bn are the distinct elements of B. Okay. So if f from A to B is a function and you have some A1, A2 up to An are non-negative integers, okay, so 1, let me not say if, let me not say if here. So 1 is if you can write the cardinality of A in this manner, that is A1 plus A2 plus up to An minus n plus 1. Okay, if you can write the cardinality of A in this manner, then you can find some element of B whose pre-image has more than AI elements. That's the idea. Okay, then there exists an in 1, 2 up to n such that cardinality of f inverse of B is greater than or equal to Bi. And 2, if you can write the cardinality of A as A1 plus A2 plus up to An plus n minus 1, then you can find some in 1, 2 up to n such that the cardinality of f inverse of Bi is less than or equal to. That's what we can prove. And again, we will prove this by contradiction. Okay, very simple. It looks a little odd, but you see the proof comes out easily. And yes, I think we might see an application of this later. So let's have a look at it. So the proof of this is very simple. So assume that this does not take place. So suppose for every I in 1, 2 up to n, the cardinality of f inverse of Bi is less than Ai. In this case, what will happen? You look at the cardinality of A, right? We all know that A, right, the inverse images of B partition out A, right? Everyone is familiar with this? If f is a function, you look at the inverse images. Look at, for each B, you look at the inverse image of B, right? This is going to form this. All these inverse images are going to form. In fact, you can do something even better than that. You can partition out B, and then look at the inverse images of these partitions. That will also partition A. Okay. But any case, if you look at the inverse images of the singleton elements of B, that's going to form a partition of A. Okay. Remove all the ones which don't have any pre-images. If you want a nice this thing. So what happens is, what I have basically said is that your cardinality of A is going to be nothing but summation I going from 1 to n cardinality of f inverse of Bi, right? That's exactly what happens. A is going to be a disjoint union of B in B such that f inverse of B. This is a disjoint union. Is everyone clear with this? You can always write the domain as a disjoint union of the pullbacks of B's. Is this okay? Because every element of A is mapped to exactly one element in B. Right? Every element of A is mapped to exactly one element of B. So for each B, you are taking this thing, and they cannot be overlaps. Why they cannot be? What will it mean that these have an overlap? It will mean that that element is mapped to two elements in B. So this is definitely a partition. This happens now. We can see that this is strictly less than AI. So this is summation AI. Okay, but we know that we need to make a small this thing earlier itself. That is, here we need to make a better estimation. That is, we know that these are integers. We know that these are integers. If this is strictly less than this, what does it mean? This would be less than or equal to AI minus 1, right? This is strictly less than this, it would be, so you get a better estimate in this manner. So therefore, what happens to cardinality of A? It is equal to summation okay, but each of them are less than or equal to this, so that gives us less than or equal to summation I going from 1 to n AI minus 1, okay, which is summation I going from 1 to n AI, which is this is exactly going to be your A1, A2 up to AN, okay, and this is summation 1, how many times you are adding? N times, so that's going to be minus n, okay. Have we got a contradiction? Have we got a contradiction? A is less than or equal to A1, A2, but here what happens? We are given that A is equal to this plus 1. So A is greater than this amount, right? Right. So A is greater than, in fact, I could have simply done this and you would still have a, and you would still get a contradiction, okay. So, so this is a contradiction because we know that this is, let me, if you want to write it more this thing, we'll have it, this is A1 plus A2 up to AN minus N plus 1 minus 1, right? What is this? This is the cardinality of A minus 1. We have got here cardinality of A is less than or equal to cardinality of A minus 1. That's definitely a contradiction. Okay, therefore cardinality of A is less than or equal to cardinality of A minus 1. That tells us that 1 is less than or equal to 0, which is a contradiction. Okay, similarly you can get a contradiction for this. Let's see how, just by exactly following the same method. So suppose for every I in 1, 2 up to n, cardinality of F inverse of Bi is strictly greater than Ai. In this case, what happens? Yes. Cardinality of F inverse of Bi is going to be, can you tell me what happens here? Better estimate. Greater than or equal to, something is strictly greater than Ai, strictly greater than Ai, it will be greater than or equal to Ai plus 1, right? It's an integer, so this has to be greater than or equal to Ai plus 1. So therefore what you have is so Pi, this is greater than or equal to which is nothing but A1 plus A2 up to An plus n. Okay, this is again a contradiction, because in this case your A was nothing but this was your A, cardinality of A. So this would be cardinality of A plus 1. You have shown that A is greater than or equal to cardinality of A plus 1, which is a contradiction. So the theorem holds true. Okay. So with this we will stop and we'll look at some applications in the next section. You will have your